When I first met Mark, it wasn't in some whirlwind of passion or a grand romantic gesture like the kind you see in the movies. It was in the middle of a grocery store aisle on a Saturday morning, both of us reaching for the same brand of coffee. He smiled, I laughed awkwardly, and before I knew it, we were making small talk about which roast kept us awake better on long workdays. It wasn't a glamorous beginning, but there was something disarmingly genuine about him. Something that made me want to keep talking even after I'd already tossed the coffee into my cart. We lingered in that aisle far longer than necessary, and by the time we parted ways, he'd slipped me his number with a crooked grin that made my heart stumble. Our first date was just as simple, but it left me buzzing. We met at a local diner with chipped mugs and waitresses who knew everyone's order by heart. He told me about his work in construction management, how he liked creating something tangible, something he could point to at the end of the day and say, "I built that." I told him about my career in graphic design, how I lived in a world of colors and concepts that often stayed trapped on a screen, but thrilled me nonetheless. The conversation flowed easily, and I was surprised by how comfortable I felt with him, as though I'd known him longer than a few hours. It wasn't until our third date that he told me about Ethan. We were sitting in his truck by the river, the windows down, the summer air carrying the faint sound of crickets and water lapping against the rocks. His hands tightened on the steering wheel before he spoke. "There's something important you should know," he said, his voice lower, serious in a way I hadn't heard before. My heart skipped. I braced myself for him to reveal he was married or harboring some hidden past, but instead he said, "I have a son. He's 10. His name's Ethan." Relief washed over me first, followed by a swirl of emotions I couldn't pin down. A child wasn't something I'd considered when I thought about dating again, but looking at Mark in that moment, his face shadowed by the moonlight, I knew it wasn't a deal breaker. If anything, it made me respect him more. I reached over, placed my hand on his, and told him I wanted to meet Ethan when the time was right. The way his shoulders dropped, the tension easing, told me just how much that answer meant to him. Meeting Ethan wasn't easy. He was polite but reserved, a boy with eyes that carried more weight than they should at his age. His mother had passed away 3 years earlier, and I could sense the fortress he had built around his heart. He didn't push me away outright, but he didn't let me in either. I made small attempts, helping with homework when he was stuck, cheering for him at his soccer games, even when he didn't acknowledge me in the stands, cooking dinners I thought he'd like. Still, he kept his distance, and I respected it. I knew trust couldn't be forced. Mark, though, never wavered. His love for me was steadfast, his affection unashamed. He would reach for my hand in the grocery store, kiss me on the forehead when I was focused on my laptop, pull me close when we curled up on the couch at night. Our romance grew in the quiet moments, in the whispered conversations before dawn, in the laughter that spilled over burnt pancakes on lazy Sundays. There was passion, yes, nights where our bodies tangled and the world outside ceased to exist. But there was also a tenderness I hadn't experienced before, a sense of being chosen, cherished. The day we married, Ethan stood stiffly in his little suit, his expression unreadable as I walked down the aisle. I tried not to let it pierce me, reminding myself that love doesn't always bloom overnight. The vows I spoke weren't just to Mark, but silently to Ethan too. A promise to be steady, to be patient, to be there even if he never called me family. When we blended households, the adjustment was rough. There were moments when I wondered if I'd made a mistake, when the silence at the dinner table felt too heavy, when I lay awake next to Mark wondering if I'd ever be more than just Dad's wife in Ethan's eyes. But Mark was my anchor. He reminded me that love was a long game, that patience was its own kind of devotion. And as the months slipped by, tiny cracks began to show in Ethan's walls. He started asking me for help with projects, letting me quiz him before spelling tests, sitting near me on the couch though he still rarely spoke. They were small steps, but I clung to them like lifelines. Then came my birthday. I hadn't expected much. Mark had already told me he was taking me out to dinner. He was thoughtful like that, always finding ways to make me feel special, whether it was flowers left on the kitchen counter or a note tucked into my purse. That evening, after our meal, we returned home to find Ethan waiting in the living room. My heart squeezed at the sight of him standing there, fidgeting with something in his hands. Mark gave me a subtle nod, his eyes soft, and I stepped forward. Ethan thrust a small handmade card toward me, his cheeks pink with embarrassment. I took it gently, unfolding the construction paper to reveal a drawing of the three of us, him, Mark, and me, standing together under a bright sun. Inside, scrawled in uneven handwriting, were the words, happy birthday. Thank you for not trying to replace my mom, but for being here for me anyway. I'm glad you're in my life." The tears came before I could stop them, blurring the ink on the page as I pulled him into my arms. For the first time, he didn't stiffen or pull away. He hugged me back, tentative but real, and in that moment something inside me shifted. It wasn't just acceptance, it was belonging. That night, after Ethan went to bed, I curled against Mark in our room, the card clutched to my chest. "He's starting to see you," Mark whispered, brushing his lips against my temple. I nodded, unable to speak, overwhelmed by the quiet enormity of what had happened. When he kissed me then, it wasn't just passion. It was gratitude, relief, and love deep enough to steady every doubt I'd ever had. The intimacy between us that night was different, tender but charged with emotion. His hands lingered as though memorizing me all over again, his mouth tracing paths that told me without words how much he cherished what we were building. And as I gave myself to him, fully vulnerably, I realized that love wasn't just about fiery romance or grand gestures. It was about moments like this, being held, being seen, being chosen, not just by him, but slowly, wonderfully, by the boy who would one day call me family.